My story is freedom. My life's work has been about creating films, television, companies, solutions, creating. And there's a funny joke in Hollywood among producers and directors. It's that no matter how many scripts you've sold or shows you've produced, that each of us is only ever really telling one story. And if you look at that body of work, at the projects you create, you can really see what people are passionate about. You can see what it is that they're committed to in life. And in fact, it's usually the thing that keeps you up at night and gets you up in the morning. So after 20 years of being an entrepreneur and a filmmaker, I finally figured out what my story is. My story is freedom. And I'm here to share with you today lessons that I've learned about freedom over the years, and specifically about a new formula for creating freedom. Freedom is really something that is about thriving. Now, the American dream that we've all known, which is success and money and big houses in the suburbs and swimming pools and kids running around, that kind of dream is really not sustainable anymore. And I assert that really what we want is to thrive, but mostly what we do is survive. And so this new formula for freedom, this new idea about living a sustainable life, is really tied to freedom. And I'd like to now invite you into my bedroom. There it is. This is where I grew up in Queens, New York. Now, this may look like an ordinary bedroom to you, but to me and my sister Sharon, this was imagination central. Now, in our secret bedroom of a laboratory, our signature creation, Bukashuk. Now, it's pronounced Bukashuk, that's correct. And Bukashuk is a mixture of almost anything you can find. It's lotion, it's baby powder, it's water, it's brightly colored crayon shavings, all mixed up in a mixing bowl. And what we do is pour that mixture into little tiny baking dishes, and we put it in our toy oven and let it bake under light bulbs. And when Bukashuk came out of the oven, they were perfumey smelling little swirls, these masterful creations. Now, Bukashuk was not to be eaten. It was probably toxic. But the point is that Bukashuk, making it, was my first taste of freedom. So what is freedom really? Freedom is the power or the right to act, to think, to say what you want without hindrance or restraint. Now, Bukashuk set the bar pretty high. And it still does, because Bukashuk was freedom. And in this interdependent world that we're living in today, thriving, surviving, creating, and having freedom in our lives is really the key to a new kind of living. Because living interdependently means that we're tied together economically, we're tied together environmentally, we're tied together socially, racially, psychologically. So freedom became my first taste, leading me to the first part of this new recipe for freedom: create. Now, in creating freedom, Bukashuk was one great example. But in reality, my experience with creation led me to a number of experiences. I started working as a film producer. I was working in the fast-paced production industry, making music videos and commercials. And what I learned there was that being a contribution to a whole was really key to an exuberant kind of living. The phones were ringing off the hook. We were producing music videos for artists like LL Cool J, Luther Vandross, and let's see, the Rolling Stones. The phones were ringing off the hooks, and in fact, phones actually had hooks back then. And one day, I walked into my office, and there was a fax on my desk. The fax was only 3 paragraphs long, and when I read it, it gripped me. And I was ready to reorder my life. The fax said, Amandla, a film about how song ended apartheid. Now, I knew that song could transform culture, could transform life. I'd seen it happen in my own community in Queens, New York, when hip-hop rose and rap became popular, and people whose voices had never been heard really moved center stage, and their stories were told through music. That power I knew very well. And when Lee Hirsch, a first-time director, sent me that fax about Amandla and asked me to produce his film about the role of song in South Africa's freedom struggle, I said yes. I said yes to contributing who I was to living a life that could make a difference. So, as a producer of the film, I raised money fast and furiously, and we went to South Africa. We went to explore the anatomy of this freedom movement and to conduct interviews to understand more about the role of freedom and how it could create a whole new world in South Africa. So we conducted hundreds of hours of interviews, but I'd like to share with you now about one in particular that helped my recipe for freedom to take shape. So I was standing on a street corner in Johannesburg, South Africa. It was an incredibly beautiful night, and I'll never forget it. My very first night in Johannesburg, and it's standing right outside of the famous Carlton Hotel, having come from my first African National Congress meeting. And it was at that meeting that I was starting to meet people and get an idea of who I might interview. And I left the hotel with notes, and I was standing outside talking to people, and I started to notice that the crowd was disappearing. And pretty soon it was just myself and a gentleman standing on the street. And it occurred to me, the valet has lost my car. So I stood there waiting, and this gentleman all of a sudden said to me, "You are so lucky." And I thought, they found my car. However, they didn't. But I saw another car coming down the road, a sleek Mercedes-Benz limo with little flags of the New South Africa flying right on the front of the car. It pulled up in front of us, the door opened, and out walked Nelson Mandela. He walked toward us, and clearly he knew this gentleman I was with very well because they embraced as I stood watching in shock. Nelson Mandela was standing next to me, my first night in South Africa, on a street corner with a lost car. And he turned to me and he said, "What brings you to South Africa?" And I found the strength to respond, even though my legs were shaking and I wanted to collapse on the ground, and I said, "I am here to explore the role of song in South Africa's struggle for freedom." And he said, "You must finish this film. You must make this film. It will be a great gift to South Africa's people." And I said, "Okay." And then I had the presence of mind to ask him the interview question that I had in my back pocket. I said to President Nelson Mandela, "Please tell me, what is your experience with song in South Africa's struggle for freedom?" And he answered me with an invitation. He invited me to come tomorrow morning to Orlando Stadium in Soweto to hear him speak. And I said, yes. And I furiously called my film crew, and we went to Soweto the next day. And when we got there, the stadium was just full of people just singing and dancing and celebrating the new South Africa. I had never in my life seen a celebration like this. And what I heard were thousands and thousands of voices singing together, and I heard the word that I'd seen on the fax, Amandla, and that word means power in Zulu. And so I stood in the crowd with my camera as Nelson Mandela himself took to the stage. He did his little Madiba dance across the stage. Now that's freedom. Nelson Mandela had been in prison for 27 years. And while he was there in prison, those freedom songs that I was there to study were sung in the streets of South Africa. And the songs themselves contain the story and the recipe for freedom itself. The songs really went from lamentation to fury to a decree to free Nelson Mandela. And on that day, standing there in the stadium, hearing all of those songs sung together amidst the chorus of Amandla, the final ingredient in this recipe for freedom was born. And people like Lindiwe Zulu, who was a freedom fighter, who had shared her story with us that day. And what she said was with what Nelson Mandela said as well. That song is what kept us alive. And standing in that stadium, what was clear was that not only were these people alive and that song had contributed to the struggle and that songs themselves embodied liberation, but in watching the people singing those songs in this cacophony of power, you could see that no matter what the laws had been, even though Nelson Mandela was now president in 1995, that song had in fact freed the people of South Africa, because in that singing, you experienced freedom. You could see it. It was palpable. You could hear it. And it led me to the final ingredient in this recipe for freedom. So we have create. We have contribute. Contribute your voice, contribute your power, contribute your talents to making a world of difference. In Amandla, here are some of the faces of the people who made that struggle a reality and brought us to the successful day when Madiba Mandela walked across the stage. The last element of this formula is thrive. Now, it's a word I've already mentioned today that really is a consideration for the new American dream. But I have a new definition for thrive. And it's a definition that I created myself out of the experience of being at that stadium that day in Soweto. Thrive is when your dreams meet the experience that you're having in life. When they come together, the experience is thrive. So, as Nelson Mandela, freedom fighter, public enemy number one, now president of the new South Africa, glided across that stage to the enthrallment of all of us, his dream that he held for 27 years while imprisoned of a new and free South Africa met the aspirations and the dreams of those people who were in the streets singing for freedom. Those dreams came together that day, they became a reality, and thrive was present. Create, contribute, and thrive represents a new kind of freedom itself. Freedom itself is the space, the precious space, from which the future gets created. So as we consider today and for the rest of our lives what a new American dream can be, I want to ask a question of each of you today. What has you feel free? And I want to encourage you to prioritize freedom in your life. Make a freedom list, not a bucket list, of the things that make you feel free, and take on doing at least one of those things each and every day. And if you do, I promise you, you will discover your Bukashuk moments and live a free life. Thank you.